Hello again, World Civilizations class. Congratulations on completing your first test for Mr. Lasseter in my class. Hopefully it wasn't too difficult and didn't tire you out, because tonight we have a video and there are going to be a few questions that you'll answer at the end of this video. So what we're looking at today are early Chinese civilizations. We'll spend a couple days on this, and we will quiz Friday on the information in today's video, tomorrow's class, tomorrow night's homework, and Thursday's class. So be prepared for that. Take notes. You don't have to write everything down in these notes, but you do need to make sure that you are taking notes on the big picture. You can do that in your digital notebook, which is where you will complete your questions. So our goals for this video: students will be able to trace the rise and fall patterns of Chinese dynasties, to describe the social structure and life in the Zhou dynasty, that's how that's pronounced, and you will define the following terms in your digital notebook vocabulary section: oracle bones, Shang Dynasty, Zhou dynasty, mandate of heaven, Tao, and filial piety. Let's go ahead and get started. The geography of China is fairly unique, and it's one of the reasons why this civilization has developed mostly in isolation. It had the least amount of interaction with the Indus River Valley civilization and the Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations, although it did have some. It originally developed along the Yellow River, or Huanghe River, in China, and you can see my mouse on that right now. Only about 12% of China is arable or suitable for growing crops, so the area that is good for farming developed pretty unique ways of doing it, and also grew grains that produce a lot, like rice. The people of China were pretty isolated because of physical barriers. You had deserts to the north and west, as you see on the map, mountains to the north, southwest, and northeast, and water, of course, to the east: the Sea of Japan, the Yellow Sea, East China Sea, South China Sea. And these barriers kept most trading away from China. It made it really at a minimum. But we will see that China developed a very unique and long-lasting culture because of this. So let's get started. The earliest dynasty in Chinese civilization is actually the Xia dynasty, but it was replaced early on by the Shang dynasty. Now, we don't have much on this first dynasty because they didn't leave written records, but writing develops in the Shang period, so we know a lot more about that dynasty, and this is when we consider Chinese written history beginning. During the Shang dynasty, most agriculture was mostly farming, with a strong upper class. There was a king who was in charge of the entire civilization, but it was divided into territories, and he appointed people to be in charge of each territory. Some other interesting things: oracle bones were used to communicate with gods and ancestors. So this tells us a lot about their religious beliefs. They would use these bones and etch questions into them, and then read cracks in the bones after they put a hot metal rod against it, and would expect that those be communication between people who had passed on or the gods giving them direction. The Shang dynasty did believe in an afterlife, and they worshipped ancestors, especially male ancestors.
It's 12 o'clock.
Also, the Shang dynasty was very skilled in the art of bronze casting, and bronze became very important in early Chinese art. We also have evidence of nobility buried with bronze art, as well as with sacrificed family members, especially kings buried with sacrificed family members. And this all basically means that there was a worship, a sense of religion, and a belief in an afterlife. The Shang dynasty is eventually replaced by the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty comes about when the legend says a tyrant was defeated. So a new political structure comes in place, very much resembling the old. But the kings ruled by what was called the mandate of heaven. This is the idea that heaven, or the kind of the law of nature, God, or so to speak, kept order in Chinese society through the Zhou king. But this was a double-edged sword. The king must also then rule according to the proper way, or Tao. This term Tao is going to be very important in Confucianism and Taoism, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. Also, this mandate of heaven was tied to dynastic cycles. So a dynasty would establish power, rule for many years, start to decline. Oftentimes people would blame the king for that. Then an invasion from outside, or possibly a rebellion, would come about, and a new dynasty would establish power. Now the Zhou dynasty was around for about 700 years. Excuse me, about 900 years. But later on we're going to see this cycle happens again and again in Chinese history. So what about the fall of this Zhou dynasty? How did it begin to fall? Well, the empire had begun to decline civilly and morally. We see examples of infighting, empire breaking away, different territories, wanting different things to happen. And so in 403 BCE, a civil war breaks out and begins the period of warring states. Basically a long period of on and off again wars in China. Eventually the Qin dynasty takes over in 221 BCE and establishes some measure of peace. So what about life in the Zhou dynasty? Well, peasants worked land owned by the elite. Sometimes they were able to own their own land. Also, trade became very important over time. Silk became the most important export from China, and also it's going to remain important all the way through to basically the time of Marco Polo and kind of the Renaissance era. This trade between China and Europe. Agriculture did expand in China with the beginning of irrigation, but most notably, and especially going to be related to Confucianism, families were patriarchal, and they had a sense of what we call filial piety. This referred to the duty of family members to be subordinate to the male head of the household. So this idea of respecting one's elders, especially the male head of household, also seen in religion in China as people worship their male ancestors. And as you see to the right, a Chinese written language develops gradually. First it used pictographs, and then later develops phonetic symbols. And this combination is still developed and has remained pretty much intact to the present day. So let's review. Trace the rise and fall patterns of Chinese dynasties. Go back and see how the Shang Dynasty fell and how the Zhou Dynasty rose, and then how that dynasty fell. Describe the social structure and life in the Zhou Dynasty. Go back and review the slides on Zhou Dynasty if needed. And then define our terms. Make sure you do that in your digital notebook. So what's next? Well, tomorrow we're going to dive into belief systems in China, especially Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. So come ready to work on that. For now, you need to answer these 3 questions in your digital notebooks. That's all for today. You have a wonderful evening. Come ready to work tomorrow.